Our speaker today is Brendan O'Connor, and our topic is CreepyDOL, cheap, distributed stalking.
Hi there. And actually, I'll take questions pretty much throughout, other than on the first slide or so. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and yell them out. There are three major takeaways from this talk. The first one is that every single thing we've been working with for the last few years leaks way too much data. Essentially, we've forgotten that privacy, not just security, is supposed to be a goal. In our efforts to make sure everything is hyper secure, make sure there's authentication tokens on everything, we've forgotten that not every user wants every part of their data exposed over the line, which is kind of interesting when we've been also defending ourselves against injection attacks and 1,000 other types of attacks on the servers. We forgot about attacks on our users. The second thing is that it's no longer possible on a technical level to blend into a crowd. Every time you see an action movie, they're stalking the major hero, and they're going, oh my God, he just went into the Mall of America. There's 10,000 people there. We'll never find him. That's not a valid assumption anymore, which means, first of all, we're going to have to get a slightly better plot device for our action films. But we're also going to have to adjust assumptions about what privacy in public means, which is something of a problem. And the third major takeaway is that we need actual fundamental level changes all the way down to the protocol level in order to fix this, which, given the way protocols works, means we're all doomed. But it's going to be a fun time in the meantime for basically the people in this room. Everyone else is in trouble. So I'm going to start with a digression, actually, because it's kind of the way I talk. I want to talk very briefly about Weave, or Andrew Auernheimer. The United States government has declared, I'm calling it a flat holy war against legitimate security research. And this has direct implications for everybody in this room. In essence, it's not possible to know with certainty that you can do any request. Indeed, Weave's request was a HTTP request over unencrypted connection with a 200 OK response, and he's serving a 41-month prison sentence. So we no longer have any assurance that we can do any security research in the United States and not be indicted, or indeed any research anywhere in the world, for those of you who are old enough to remember Dmitry Skylorov. This is probably not a good idea. And the thing about Weave is, of course, he's a notorious troll. There's lots of reason to hate him. The thing about criminal law, though, and this is my secondary area, I'm also just finished my second year of law school at the University of Wisconsin, we don't get a second chance. Famously, Mighty Casey got 3 swings to strike out. We get 1 because of the way precedent works. And the problem with precedent in the United States is that it often takes 20, 30, 40, 50 years of, for instance, segregated schools or slavery being legalized before somebody says, actually, we should probably fix that. And it goes back to a precedential court. So we only get 1 time. And the problem is, therefore, we have to support Weave. We have to do the work to support Weave because it's for us. Everyone's enlightened self-interest in this room should indicate that they really don't want to spend a lot of time in federal prison on the other side of the bars. So if you'd like to not do that, I suggest you follow the Andrew Auernheimer controversy. A few of us in this room actually got together and wrote an amicus brief. A bunch of security researchers you've probably heard of. Professor Matt Green from Hopkins, the Sergey Bradis, the patron saint of the Gospel of Weird Machines, Dan Kaminsky, Jericho, Space Rogue, Mudge. It's a pretty fun list, actually. And we wrote that this has fundamental problems for security research, and that security researchers should be given the same legal protections as people doing security and consumer product research on physical devices. In essence, if the Computer and Fraud and Abuse Act applied to the away from keyboard world, you could never have Ralph Nader's research on the Corsair. It would be illegal to test anything without the permission of the owners. In the meantime, there's a chilling effect because we can't trust that legal actions aren't going to be prosecuted anyway. So this restricts the testing plan for CreepyDOL. It means that I can't deploy it across an entire city without my being personally present at every location and filtering it only to devices I personally own. This doesn't mean that we don't get valid results from it, but it means that the results aren't as broad-based as we'd like. And I'm sorry for that. If you think that's a problem in the United States, then I suggest you call your elected representatives and support a complete repeal of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. In the meantime, since I'm a law student, we always have to start everything with extremely serious disclaimers. This is mine. It works about as well as you'd think. It turns out they're completely non-binding, but suffice it to say, I don't speak for anybody except my own corporation, Malice Afterthought. This disclaimer is not intended to be ironic. So first, a note on DARPA Cyber Fast Track. CreepyDOL itself is not CFT work, and I want to be very clear on that because I've had some odd questions. DARPA is very nice people, filled with very nice people, and they try very hard not to build stuff that creep people out because there have been some problems with the Pentagon creeping people out in the past, setting aside the current Snowden type work. They're very nice people. I try not to give them unnecessary heart attacks. So there is work from two separate Cyber Fast Track contracts in this. The reticle system and the visualization system are both CFT work. So thanks very much to Mudge and to the CFT entire community for letting me do something much more interesting with my time than actually paying attention in law school. So brief roadmap. We're going to start with our goals here. So the first question is, how much data can I extract from only passive wireless monitoring? Well, we know it's a whole lot, right? But what if I didn't have any money? Specifically, what if I'm a graduate student, but my work isn't supported by my university because I'm in the wrong program? Turns out when you leave a major research university in a computer science program and go to a major research university in a law program, but still do computer security research, they look at you very oddly when you ask them for grant money. They think it's kind of weird. They're like, no, you can't have a grant for that. You can go have a Rhodes Scholarship. I'm like, will that let me buy lots of network security stuff? No. And you have to become a jogger. Crap. Okay, so we're going to do this for basically pizza money. Admittedly, Madison has some very nice pizza joints, so I've maybe stretched the definition of pizza money a little bit. But the idea is we want to do this entirely passive. And we get actually a pretty good way of doing that, because those of you who know wireless at low levels very well, at very low levels, know quite well that wireless devices leak information all the time. Every few seconds, your wireless device screams out a list of every wireless network it's ever connected to, and its name, its MAC address, which can be changed, but on mobile devices it's actually really hard to do it. On iOS, I've only seen it done through jailbreaking, and if you jailbreak and change your MAC address, it's always broken lots of other applications, kind of randomly. So it becomes basically impossible even for the paranoid to change their MAC addresses. On Android, it's probably somewhat more possible. Most things are on Android, but it's still not the kind of thing in the general purveying of users. So we're going to do wireless sensing, but we're going to do it with not just one network, because one wireless sensor is way old and passé. So for this we use 10, and the idea is we're going to distribute them over a whole area, and we're going to listen to wireless. But our goal isn't to look for wireless traffic, right, or wireless devices. As you can tell from the title of the talk, CreepyDOL, we really actually want to get a lot of creepy data. What we want to do is be able to track people, not just wireless devices. But it turns out that people are strapping tracking devices to themselves. And not just for BlackHat parties where they won't let you in unless they scan your badge, which is really weird, by the way. Don't do that. But all the time, we strap these mobile devices. And then sometimes we sit down in coffee shops and open up still more mobile devices so I can get lots and lots of really good data. So it turns out I can do identity theft. And when I say identity theft for the context of this presentation, I don't mean identity theft like I'm going to steal your social security number, because I don't really care about your social security number. What I care about is the type of data like, who are you? What do you do? What do you do online? Where do you go in person? Do you hang out at a certain place a lot? Do you go any place that might be considered naughty by some of your coworkers? Ultimately, what I want is information about your patterns and your practice as you go throughout your day and throughout your week and throughout your month, because that's what I can use to blackmail you. That ultimately is actual information and actual power, and we can get that incredibly easily because of the flaws we'll talk about for the rest of this presentation. The second goal for this whole project is, can we do large-scale sensor networks without centralized communication? And centralized communication is great, right? We just plonk a big router in the middle of an open field, and then we have like say Zigbee devices that can communicate for miles. We use the really high-powered ones. But then you have a single point of failure. When a rabbit eats all the wires because they're coded in PLA, which apparently tastes yummy in rabbit language, I swear that's actually happened. An entire parking lot full of cars at Denver Airport got taken out in the same exact way. Then we have a centralized point of failure. Also, if we're doing naughty things, then the government has a centralized point of nuke that from orbit, and then our network goes away. So I'd rather not have centralized communication. So we're going to decentralize communication, both in terms of its command language and in terms of how they're actually talking to each other. And finally, the third goal for this is we want to be able to present a huge amount of data. Some of the test data sets I had were more than 600 gigabytes of packet capture data. So we want to be able to present a massive amount of data in a way that doesn't make people's brains hurt the way that the Prism slides made everybody's brains hurt. I saw more people who will professionally produce your BlackHat slides. By the way, no, these BlackHat slides are authentically ugly. I did not have a homegrown artisan uglifier for my BlackHat slides. A lot of them were advertising their work by rewriting a CIA slide deck or an NSA slide deck. That's kind of a terrifying thing. So we're going to try and make it, if not exactly beautiful and artisanal, at least something that we can get a grasp on a huge amount of data pretty quickly. This is essentially the difference between systems like the Red Phone project versus systems like Off the Record in ADM or Pigeon, right? It doesn't matter whether ultimately we have incredible technical reliance and technical reliability. It matters that people be able to actually use it. Like, this is why CryptoCat is so cool. So we hope that, especially for the underlying communications technology, what we call reticle for this project, that it's actually relatively easy to use. And I've striven to have the nodes be deployable by anybody. You can teach any random grunt or goon how to deploy these in about 30 seconds. And we'll talk about that slightly later. So now we're going to talk about a little bit of background, because I come from academia and because it's important to cite your elders. So first of all, background in sensor networks. There are incredible stuff from academic sensor networks. There's mobile ad hoc networking, which is the MANET projects. They have incredible sensors. They're very sensitive. They run on picowatts per hour. It's amazing how great you can do if you have massive NSF funding and basically no constraints on time and an unlimited supply of slave labor. I'm sorry, I mean graduate students. And we end up spending $500, $600, $700, $800 per node. So to be clear, they do incredible research, and we can rely on some of this. The idea of, well, what do you do? Can you shut down your processors in order to save some power? But this isn't going to end up looking like an academic sensor network. But I encourage you all to look at the stuff being done by academic sensor networks. The other background is large-scale surveillance, and I swear to God, this is what I said in March. I said, one can assume that the intelligence community has solved all of the problems involved in CreepyDOL before I did, and they should be cited as prior art. I'd love to do so as soon as they publish their results. And then June happened, and this was just kind of sad. So very cool. So I pour one out for the intelligence community. A lot of this stuff is actually kind of a problem. And so undoubtedly lots of engineers toiling in secret spent months or years solving the same problems that I've also solved. So they are truly the first discoverers of a lot of this. I simply rest in their footsteps. Let's talk about the architecture. And first we're going to talk about the hardware behind this. So the hardware behind this is called, for reasons that are not likely to become clear anytime soon, the F-bomb project. Mostly because that way I can drop it from UAVs, and I am indeed dropping the F-bomb, which I enjoy. So the F-bomb is the falling or ballistically launched object that makes back doors, because I've done some government contracting, and so I can make the world's most terrible acronyms kind of funny. Originally I did a presentation on this version, this board, at ShmooCon in 2012. At this time, the F-bomb project was based on the Marvell Shiva board, or the Shiva plug, as many of you guys know it. This is the same thing that underlies the old Pony plugs, which are great devices. The problem is, to buy a Marvell Shiva board cost $100. And I didn't want to spend $100 for a whole node, let alone for just the underlying thing. Luckily, there were lots of companies making products based on the Shiva plug, and not all of them had great business models that went along with that. So Pogo Plug, who'd originally sold theirs for $150 a piece, ended up basically fire sailing the things to get them off their books for $25 a piece. So for $25 a piece, you could pick up a Marvell ARM chip running about, I think, 500 megahertz on 128 RAM. It was pretty good. They were unfortunately bright pink, but that's why you take off the cases. Conveniently, they also fit really well inside a carbon monoxide detector, such as you can buy on eBay. So I got a question. How many of you in this room have recently checked your carbon monoxide detectors to make sure that they're not secretly spy sensors? There's one person in the back who actually goes through his carbon monoxide detectors, and that is the best hacker in the room. I guarantee you, we all bow before you. The rest of you guys are in a lot of trouble, because this thing can power a couple LEDs that just go beep when you hit the test button. So you ultimately have to tear it apart and look for things like that little radioactive thing that actually measures the carbon monoxide. So this was F-bomb version 1. These are FBOM version 2, and we've made a lot of changes. First of all, instead of being based on the Marvell Shiva plug, we've done what every other hacker in existence has done and bought a bunch of Raspberry Pis because they're awesome. They're really cheap. You can buy them for 25 bucks and you don't have to go to sketchy Amazon Marketplace dealers. They run an easier version of Linux to work with for most of us. They run Debian versus Arch Linux, which can be odd. And also they run on 5 volts instead of 12. It was an amazing number of things I accidentally set on fire by plugging 12 volts into 5 volt connections. So I firmly support the use of 5 volts everywhere in the Raspberry Pi project. For this, we actually use Raspberry Pi Model A's, which is the kind without the Ethernet, which means that you get about 300 milliamps as your total current draw when the whole thing is running, which is pretty good. It also doubles the RAM, has more processors on board, etc. You can see down at the lower left-hand corner there that there's a little tiny, it looks like an apple. I promise it's not. It's one of those cheap knockoffs that apparently electrocuted somebody last month, which is why we place these in other people's homes, ladies and gentlemen. So I power this via USB, so you can see the USB prongs on the rest of them. It gives us a lot of flexibility that, again, I didn't have with version 1 of the FBOM. Essentially, we can plug it into any wall outlet, preferably somebody else's wall outlet. We can plug them into USB batteries. We can plug them into Minty Boost. We can plug in anything that gives us 5 volts, which is quite cool. Even though they're USB, they don't take data from it, no matter how hard you try. You can also see there's a couple little cables sticking out of each box. Yeah, that was my bad. I measured wrong when I bought these cases. So this is brought to you by a drill and about half an hour to allow the cables to all turn around. But they're kind of cute little devices, actually. So the idea is this has everything you need in order to steal an entire city's stuff. And it's all pretty cheap. A total cost for one of these is $57.08, all included, shipping included. And one of the most expensive components, annoyingly, was the case. Originally, I had intended to 3D print the cases because I love 3D printers, and then I wouldn't have to have the little bulges on the outsides. But I ended up not getting my 3D printer within about 4 months of when it was promised to me. So instead, we just bought them from a place online who were kind enough to send me, after I drilled them all, oh, you know, we can laser cut those for you for free. This was an hour and a half with a drill and little tiny ABS chunks all over my apartment. But it's pretty good. Got 2 Wi-Fis, an SD card, which is the standard hard drive for the Raspberry Pi, the USB power. It works pretty well. Basically, any 13-year-old kid who mows lawns energetically for a couple weekends can buy a 10-pack of these. And with a 10-pack, you can do a lot of really good work. So why 2 Wi-Fi? Well, it's because if you notice in the last slide, there wasn't any, and then we plug in a Verizon 3G dongle, so to give them all centralized communications. And we don't do that for 2 reasons. One, because it's really expensive and this goes against the first goal. But secondly, because that gives us a real problem with deniability. If I throw one of these at somebody, which I'm not going to do because I'm going to really injure the first row, I think, or some other random row because my arm's not very good, then you just pull it out. You pull out the MAC address for the identifier for the 3G dongle. You go to Verizon and say, who's paying for this and where's their house so I can beat them up because obviously they're spying on me. There's nothing in this that isn't sold everywhere in every country in the world, which means that you can't even target a particular country as having deployed these. So we have 2 Wi-Fi then because we simply use local ubiquitous Wi-Fi. And it's very well to say, oh, well, but only a few cities have local global Wi-Fi, right? That just works the same way everywhere and it works perfectly. In theory, we have that in Madison, but I've never actually gotten it to connect ever one time. But we don't need that because now I wrote a library. For some reason, no one had ever written an open source library that just clicked through all those little accept buttons on every little captive portal agreement. So now I did. It's called Portal Smash. It's on GitHub, and it will connect to Wi-Fi and click the little button for you so that you can have unlimited internet access. So this is our way of phoning home. So it's important to note, therefore, that this isn't what's traditionally considered a mesh network, where the nodes all connect to each other over their own radios locally. Instead, we're going to have them all phone home over Tor and create deniability that way. So next, the command and control software component. This is the middleware in our kind of layer cake of creepiness. So I completed a DARPA CFT a year ago called Reticle Leaderless Command and Control, and I presented it last summer here in Vegas, but there's been a complete rewrite since then. So let's talk about briefly what's inside it. Every reticle node, and therefore every CreepyDOL node, because this is the communications middleware that makes everything in CreepyDOL work well, runs CouchDB, which is a NoSQL database that works pretty well and has some certain properties I enjoy, plus Nginx, Tor, and a couple custom scripts to make everything keep working. This lets the nodes combine into a peer-to-peer, what I call a contagion network. The idea is that anything that goes into any node goes to every other node immediately, which is the science of contagion as brought to you by H.P. Lovecraft. They talk via Tor, which prevents anybody who has one of these things that suddenly magically showed up in their coffee shop determining where they're actually talking to, determining where the other networks or where the other nodes are. This both helps solve our introduction problem, because now instead of communicating IP addresses and having some kind of weird NAT punch-through problem, we can just have a Tor hidden service, and Tor solves our NAT problems for us, which is quite nice. The other thing is, then it's built into reticle, is what I like to call grenade encryption. The idea is that we're going to make reverse engineering of a node, if you find one in your place, as hard as possible. And so we'd like to encrypt all the command and control data on the hard drive, and encrypt basically everything of any use. But there's no monitor on this, and there's no keyboard. So you could do one of two things. You could store the encryption key on the device, which makes every person using encryption cry. Or you could do kind of what I ended up settling on, which is at boot, you stick a USB key in this, and then it reads the key, it saves it in volatile memory only, and then you actually pull the USB key and throw it at an enemy, which when they're on batteries works better, as long as you're not beaning people in the audience. So this makes it way harder to recover the encryption keys. Yes, you can still cold boot them, but the cool thing is that most people are going to go, huh, what's that? Unplug, and then it's too late to do a cold boot. You've only got a couple seconds. As long as we haven't created a culture in which most people's first response to anything they don't see they aren't used to seeing in their house is to pour liquid nitrogen on it, then this is a relatively effective response to the cold boot attack, especially when they're not on batteries. If we've created the liquid nitrogen pouring culture, then I think we've won and we can all go home. So as you can see, again, so we've got a Ruby, what I call the reticle runner, which is just a kind of mother script that connects to it and makes it do stuff, excuse me. I can speak English good. Then it connects to the CouchDB storage. It talks through Nginx. Talk to me offline if you'd like to know why a 2-year-old bug is ruining my life still, about CouchDB and client-side SSL verification. But the upshot is we have multiple layers of encryption. Every node has a revocable key, and they all get to talk to each other through this cute contagion network. So CreepyDOL is, in the end, just a mission that reticle runs. And reticle is open source as its own project. So a lot of the code is online already. There's been a few modifications I've made that I'll push in the next couple of weeks. And I hope that we start getting a lot more really cheap sensor network stuff that works like this, because there's a lot of good additions you could make to a node that's already as creepy as the CreepyDOL nodes are. So let's talk now about what CreepyDOL actually is, besides just this thing that runs on this other thing that is kind of confusing. So the design of CreepyDOL, first, is that we're going to have distributed querying for distributed data. We're not bringing our own bandwidth, as I already talked about. We're stealing other people's bandwidth. Very nice people with coffee shops that have accept buttons. But since we're not bringing our own bandwidth, it's tacky to capture everything in a whole area and then ship the whole PCAP home. We're going to overload Tor, which makes Tor developers sad. We're going to overload the coffee shop, which makes everybody drinking coffee sad. So instead, we're going to filter out the PCAPs and do pretty much all the actual intelligence gathering on the nodes themselves, which we can get away with because unlike academic sensor nodes, we're just using Raspberry Pis that have a good little bit of horsepower. So we're going to digest all of the queries pretty much on the endpoints and only send home what we really, really need in order to do higher level queries. So anything that we can run on the nodes, we're going to run on the nodes. And the only thing we don't do is we don't process multi-node data. That is queries that take advantage of a whole bunch of different pings over time. Because even though every node has access to all the data, in order to do that kind of query, they need to use a lot of storage space, and they don't have very much storage space. We only put little 8 gig chips in them. So instead we do the multi-node queries on the back end, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the centralized query for high-level questions. So we don't answer questions like, well, where does he go 3 or 4 days a week looking for coffee on one node? Well, unless it really is exactly the same place. And even then, we try to pull the data off the nodes as quickly as possible. So we did these kind of higher level data mining queries, like he showed up for coffee at 8 a.m. on Monday. You showed up at coffee for 8 a.m. on Tuesday. I wonder, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I think he goes there for coffee every day, right? We're not even talking high-level artificial intelligence, but we can do that as long as we don't need to run it on one of these endpoints. So we run these on a centralized system. What we essentially do is we have a data sync node that looks to everybody else like just another reticle device. And indeed, it can be just another reticle device. And it pulls the data out of the CouchDB and replicates the delete command back across everybody else's database. This allows them to continue grabbing sensor data, and as long as it gets pushed to someone else in the contagion network every now and then, we get all the data at home, and we don't have to worry about any nasty, hard computation on a Raspberry Pi, which can take a really long time. So this is our data query methodology. It's called NOM, as in we NOM all of your data. And so NOM stands for three things: nosiness, observation, and mining. So observation is probably the easiest one to explain. The idea is we're going to be searching packet capture data, or packet captures for intelligence level data, right? That is, we want to know your name, not just you transmitted a packet over TCP at this point in the day. In order to do that, we could go one of two ways. Option one, which would be hard, and you're going to see we didn't do the hard things because we didn't need to, would be have an artificially intelligent matrix that looks at all packet captures, looks for strings that look a lot like email addresses, and then parses them out. We didn't do that for two reasons. One, because it didn't do very well in AI. And two, and really more importantly, is because you'd end up with a lot of data you really wouldn't know what it was. Was that an email address they typed in? Was it them viewing a list of email addresses? It wouldn't give us data that we could tie back to a device. It would give us data that we'd tie kind of to a cloud around a person, which lets us stalk their third cousin twice removed sometimes instead of the person we're actually trying to stalk. So that's not very helpful. So instead we have application-specific observation filters. This works very, very simply. I know that on a certain dating website, for instance, at a certain point in the HTML that is always transmitted, one part is, here's the authentication cookie, because most data websites haven't heard about Firesheep yet. Then, assuming I don't want to just download all their dating website data, which turns out to be really boring for most people, not that I've done that, then we can look at it and say, okay, here is where in every packet capture from the same dating website, their profile picture is. Now we've got heads moving around a map, which is kind of a cool trick, right? So now we have to do that, one for dating website A, one for data website B, and so on, right? But then these are tiny little scripts that just take a couple minutes each to write, instead of huge natural language processing or other kind of artificially intelligent mechanisms that take months or years and almost infinite amounts of storage and memory to run. So this is one part. This is the observation queries. Then we have N queries, nosy queries. These take data garnered from the observation queries and submit it to a bunch of other things. So for instance, one good example is most websites have a forgot password feature, and most of those websites still haven't heard that it's a bad security idea to respond differently if I know your email address and therefore your account versus if I don't. They should just say, if you had an account here, we've emailed you. But instead they say either, I've never heard of that email address, what are you talking about? Or they say, yes, we've heard of you and we've sent it home. So there's these great services online which you can send an email address to, and they'll say, hey, here's your 300 or 400 accounts on the internet that all use that same email address, which is great because then we can outsource the creepy to everybody else. Finally, we have mining queries, and these are the kind of pain in the butt ones. Mining are a little bit more artificially intelligent. They do things like, for instance, pattern and practice information. He always goes for coffee every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, or if it's me, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because 8 o'clock is a terrible time and no one should ever see it. But they can also do queries like, hey, I see this node walking around a lot. It moves back and forth, it goes hither, it goes yon. But then there's another node that I don't see very often. But if I see it, it's always in the same place as this node. And it's always when this other node isn't moving very much. It'll walk into a place, it'll stop moving, and then this other node will show up, and then it'll go back down again, right? The node will drop off, and then this node will move again. What is that, boys and girls? That is the person's laptop. And for sure, once is coincidence, twice is enemy action. About 10 times we go, that's his frickin' laptop, and we can just save that. And then we know, take all the data from these two devices and combine them. We found ourselves a laptop. This is the kind of thing you can do with higher level data mining queries. And again, another useful area for future work, because I haven't had time to implement a lot of the mining queries, just a little bit. So we can get all of this type of data because all of these applications leak way too much. Here's a packet from Apple's iMessage. It's the standard waking up an iPhone, pull to see if I've got any new messages packet. And if you look down at the bottom, you can see something very interesting that shouldn't be here. Because iMessage is secure, right? Really smart people have told us, what about all the security, right? You can't read iMessage, can you? No, I can't, because go ask a real cryptologist about how to read iMessage. I'm not there. But what I can read is the last line there where it says iPad 3.1 and running 61310B329, which is the iOS build number. So now I know that whoever this person is, they're carrying an iPad. It's an iPad third generation, and it's running 613. So immediately I know if it's an older version, I can exploit it. And I know what to look for if I'm going to mug them, which is quite nice. There's no reason to transmit this data if Apple needs to know it, which I don't know why Apple would need to know it, but let's just assume that Apple does need to know it. Why is that in the user agent, which is not protected by TLS, instead of somewhere inside the TLS envelope? This is what I meant before. We're leaking too much data for just random reasons, essentially. There's a lot of online consumer shopping applications that I'm not going to name, but they're not the one you're thinking of. There's a lot of other smaller ones that people richer than me shop from. And they leak everything. They leak, again, you know, what version of iOS you're running, what version of the application you're running. Some of them leak your location, all in this user agent header. And these are not like location-based shopping mechanisms, right? These are national or international brands. There's no good reason to put this in an unsecured thing, because what this does is it makes everyone in the area know more and more about this person. So the idea is, again, even with secure websites, we can see a lot. Even with the most highly secured websites, let's say Dropbox, right, which has some problems, but let's assume for the minute that Dropbox was a paragon of security and never had any password reset vulnerabilities. We can still see that a user's talking to Dropbox. If we've gotten their email address from something else, now we know, well, I've got their email address. If they've got a forgot password recovery that, like the Apple one, allows me to guess a couple other things I've probably stolen from the online dating profile, like the name of their third cat, then, I've got an account. So we get all of this data for free because no one's been bothered to secure it. It's been, for some reason, not inculcated in our culture to remember that the user is also under attack all the time, not just us. So this is the overall architecture, and the text is a little bit small. But on the left, you can see 5 example CreepyDOL nodes. They all talk to each other. They drop data into a sync node, which is just another CreepyDOL node. The only difference is the sync node is programmed to delete data off of the network. The sync node throws it into 2 different types of data storage, one called Shark, which is a all-in-memory replacement for Apache Hive, part of the Hadoop project, which mostly lets me run Hadoop-type queries really, really fast, and drops it into another instance of CouchDB, which lets me run other types of queries really, really fast. Then we talked to the visualization layer. Remember when we were going to do nice user things, we weren't going to have Brendan talk for an hour on end about all the stuff on his slides? Yes, we're going to have the visualization layer too. And so that's just going to talk to those last data providers. Finally, we talked to an OpenStreetMaps provider such as CloudMade so we can get maps. Because at the end of the day, we want to see people running around the room for our entertainment. The visualization comes from a second DARPA CFT contract that's also called NOM for reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. And I use the Unity game engine. How many of you guys have ever programmed with the game engine before? Like 5 or 6, right? They're really cool though, because there are millions of mythical man months and mythical woman months that go into developing these things by people who really know games. And for those of you guys who've tried to do visualization before and rolled your own engine or just used processing, which is what I usually do, it's so nice to be able to just say, throw in 10,000 nodes, and it'll just pretty much work. As a side note, so most of Unity is written in C#, and you can write in C#, or you can write in JavaScript. In the next time I do something like this, I'll just learn C#, because writing JavaScript that's actually ecmascript.net, that's then upgraded with a bunch of other Unity-specific functions, that's then compiled into the .NET Common Language runtime, and then interpreted at runtime on an iPad by Mono, is the most unbelievably complicated set of compiler hell ever. You never thought you had JavaScript debugging problems until this. It's amazing. But it actually works really well once you've gotten your code debugged. And it works so well because it's a real consumer-facing game engine that probably runs hundreds of things you guys all have on your Apple or Android devices. So I can run it on iPad, I can run it on Mac, I can run it on Windows, Linux, Android, Xbox 360, Wii. Maybe I could be creepy with a Wii. That sounds wrong. Let's just move along. So the idea of part of this is also, we're not going to do the traditional problem of run all the computation locally and do the visualization there. For two reasons. One, we have a larger scale problem. If you have 600 gigabytes of RAM on your local computer, I would like to make you my friend. But I do not, so I can't run this level of data visualization on my own computer. So we're going to outsource it. We're going to actually outsource it to the cloud, and we'll talk about that a little later. But we can outsource it pretty much anywhere, even just to a virtual machine, and then run the visualization locally on something with not a lot of RAM. So if you can run a Unity game, which means if you've got a computer in the last 10 years, or a mobile device in the last 3, you can run the non-visualization system. So what does this actually look like? Well, we've got a demo video, because I didn't want to taunt the demo gods by actually doing this quite live, but I recorded it just yesterday, so it's pretty good. But first, we're going to talk back about test parameters. Remember Weave? So to prevent badness and sadness and being on the very pointy end of a government investigation, we only looked at our own data. Let's all say together, we only look at our own data, because otherwise there are federal prosecutors with very small senses of humor. So no part of this ever collected data from any random stranger. As I mentioned, that sucks, right? Because like it's way more fun. And it's probably legal. Most courts have said that Wi-Fi sniffing is legal. And you go ahead and get on stage and talk about how much you sniff from all the people of Madison. How dare you. So this doesn't prevent us testing scaling, because we can just either generate more data or switch our own MAC address randomly or a few other things like that. It doesn't prevent us testing the accuracy. All it does is it means that we only have one person to stalk, me. So I'm going to put all my personal information up on a stage in about 20 seconds. So I hope you all feel the pain of me not simply taking the identities of every person in Madison who probably wouldn't even notice. So this is what it looks like. Powered by Unity, because may as well give them a plug. I'm sure they'll love that PR. It's a simple grid. I designed it to look more or less like StarCraft, right? It's a real-time strategy game, except instead of alien troops, we have people. We have the people pop up, and quickly we get from OpenStreetMaps the map. We can zoom in, we can zoom out, which is quite nice. The little black dot in the middle is just so I can see where the camera is pointing, because again, not a professional games developer. We can do box zooms, which means we can have them redrawn across the whole area and zoom in on the map, which will load now, to see where they are. You can hover over them to look at MAC addresses, which is kind of cool because we have time and we have MAC addresses, or we can click on them and see everything about them forever, because all of these application filters just dump it into the visualization. So you can see that my real name is Brendan O'Connor, which if you didn't see it on the deck outside, that's what it is. My email address, you can see which feed reader I'm using, although I've covered it to protect the guilty. You can see that I use a dating website. Not anymore, for those of you who've met my girlfriend, but I took my old profile, I promise, and I pulled my photo out of it in real time. I also pulled the completely unsecured Forecast.io GPS trace. I pulled the completely unsecured, for no reason, Apple iMessage stuff. So you know an awful lot about me immediately. And now you know, if you know where that place is, where I was, what I was doing at that time. And you can play it forward and see, well, then where did he go next? And you can see some of the other dots that were me wandering around the middle of Madison with my own nodes, only tracking myself, right? And so then we start to get the pattern and practice information. Immediately, you can have a human look at that and go, well, I know what that is. He was in that Peace Park. That must be where all those hippies in the drum circle hang out, which is true, because it's Madison. But so is every place else, because it's Madison. But immediately, you know, imagine that there's an adult store on some part of that block. There's not, but imagine that that third dot from the right there was. Now you have something you can start to use against people. Probably not in Madison, but if you come to Vegas and go to the wrong place, maybe this becomes of more interest to your employer. Or maybe this becomes of more interest to someone else's employer, about someone else. Because ultimately, this is what information is. Information is power. And this is provided information. And so when it pops up on screen, I want you all to think that that's your weirdly silhouetted profile off of an old dating website profile. And remember what a bad idea it would be if this was happening to all of you in real time. Because it probably is. If I can do this, any of you can. So where do we go from here? Well, we can talk about scaling. Sharding the contagion networks is the easiest way to scale up the reticle project, to go from 10 or 20 nodes to 100 or 1,000, just cutting them into smaller pieces. And sharding actually works really well. You just have a contagion over a single area. You can actually shard them regardless of geographic area, so you could kind of intermix which nodes were in which shard in which geographical area. It doesn't hurt, because remember, your replication is to the other nodes in the shard, and they don't need to be geographically close to each other. Then all the different shards have their own data sinks. They all drop it into the same large CouchDB, and it's perfectly fine. We can actually also scale the back end too, the same large CouchDB. As I mentioned before, I've tested this up to 600 gigabytes of packet capture data. Just increase Shark. Again, I don't have that much RAM, just put it on Amazon. Amazon has a perfectly nice way of running Shark. One of those awesome 8XL servers, right? The visualization engine just communicates over HTTP because there's nothing if you can't live a little ironically. But you can run anywhere in the cloud. You don't need particularly real-time transit to talk to those things, or to talk to the server. And because it's doing all the heavy lifting for you, you don't need a lot of power. So you can kind of wander around using a 3G connection and see, oh God, look at all those people next to me. Click. Oh, that person next to me in the coffee shop has been a very bad person, and that makes me a sad panda. Finally, with scaling limits of visualization. So I just showed you 10 or 20 nodes, right? Because again, it's only me. I've tested this to a couple thousand. After a couple thousand, the visualization gets a little angry because ordinarily I'm told games developers have something called common sense about how much their computer can hold. But the cool thing is, again, there are really smart graphics people who figured out how to do this next. And so we can do standard techniques out of video games, such as, first of all, grouping, which I'm actually already doing. You saw the black nodes versus the white, and the black nodes were actually groups of data, so that if they're essentially on top of each other, they just make them one node where you can click. But we can also do things like a limited field of view and a limited range of view, so that you could, since you couldn't see anything 20 miles in the distance anyway, if you were in a first-person shooter, we don't draw things 20 miles away from your screen. This is all pretty standard stuff. It's the obvious next place to go. We can also do cool enhancements. So there are talks for a lot of the rest of this weekend about how much fun it is to use a $20 software-defined radio instead of the old $1,500 software-defined radios to spy on everyone around you. I will leave it to the reader's imagination exactly what you could do if you could listen to any frequency above 50 megahertz and up to about 2 gigahertz for an arbitrarily large period of time. I will tell you that a Raspberry Pi can actually process the data from an RTL SDR, which means that you can do the same kind of observation level filter in real time on a Raspberry Pi. And again, if we're only saving results into the database, then it all works quite well. Obviously, you could break into your local Wi-Fi. I didn't. There's plenty of Wi-Fi. There's no point in breaking into my local Wi-Fi. Just click the accept button. But it's very, very easy to add something like Reaver or other standard types of attacks to break into your local wireless network and then use that to make sure you've got wireless everywhere. And finally, you could add things like something like the Jassiger project using the Wi-Fi Pineapple to great effect to make sure that wireless devices connect to you. Because this is the cool thing. We get data from all of those wireless nodes in the map, whether or not they're connected. Most of those nodes that I showed you on the map a few minutes ago didn't actually sit down and connect to a wireless network at that point. They kept walking, they kept moving. But I heard them beaconing. And because everything is conveniently stored with a primary and relatively unique key for our NoSQL database, we can just correlate it all. With Jassiger, we can force them to connect to us, which is great if you're actually going to start, stealing credit cards and doing SSL strip and all that. So depending on what you want to do and how criminal you really want to be, you can go ahead and add that to this in about 3 clicks. It's not a big deal. So how do we mitigate this? Well, the problem is this is a multi-level problem. Wi-Fi down at the lowest level, right, IEEE 802.11 plus subsequent extensions, tells us that we should constantly ping and send our MAC address in our list of networks. Well, that's a bad idea, because then I've got personnel tracking, and if I just find out your MAC address, I can track you around the city. At the middle level, we've got a bad idea too, which is that iOS doesn't have any way that a user can force a VPN to connect to Wi-Fi, or like connection to Wi-Fi before any packets go through. A lot of laptops have that functionality. There's no way to do it on iOS. I'm not sure there's a way to do it on Android, but I don't use it, so I can't swear to that. So the OS is also to blame, right? Because there's no way to shield our data. If it was only GPS tracking and MAC addresses, that would be really bad, but it wouldn't be quite as bad as when we've got a photo moving around the map. And finally, the app level is to blame, right? Why are apps transmitting this much data? There's no excuse for this, right? We don't need this much data. A random high-end shopping app does not need to know my exact 5 digits of precision GPS-style location every single time I decide to buy an expensive pair of high heels, right? Probably should have said that either. But we've gotten addicted to this big data, right? And there are people in every room in this conference who are going to tell you how awesome big data is. And you're right, big data is awesome if I want to steal your identity. It's less awesome if you're a consumer. We should demand better, and we should be doing better at every one of these levels. The problem is, it's going to end up a lot like the 90s virus problem, right? Where, the app developer says, well, the user shouldn't use me in an unsecured place. And the OS developer says, well, you don't really need to connect to VPN. You shouldn't be doing anything bad. Even though the first time you connect to Wi-Fi, it automatically sends your iMessage updates, your Dropbox updates, every push message in the world before you have a chance to click the VPN button. And the IEEE is going to go, hey, we don't do security. Look at web. We're terrible with security, so why should we care at all? The problem is it's everyone's problems, just like it was when every user in the world was getting viruses every 30 days because the OS was broken and the users were broken. We have to fix every layer. So it's the status quo, right? We're the status quo, we're just going to be doomed. Unfortunately, the status is not quo. This is not an acceptable behavior. We cannot, as users and as developers and as hackers, tolerate this level of privacy leakage. We should be doing better, and as developers, we have a responsibility to do better. So I want to talk for one more second, my second digression here, but it's just one slide, about our responsibility, right? Because we have a problem. There's been a lot of blow-ups in the last year, pretty spectacularly at ShmooCon 2013, that academics and developers and hackers just kind of hate each other, because one says that we're not rigorous enough, and we say you don't do anything but cite prior work, and we all just get into a loud screaming match, and then we start yelling at DARPA program managers off the stage, which was kind of terrifying. So there needs to be some kind of way that we can figure out what our responsibility is. We can figure out what the best practices are. Because the problem is, for every project like CreepyDOL, for every project you've heard here, we have an awful lot of time spent reinventing the same thing, right? Whether that's figuring out again how Kaminsky injected Len Sassaman's face into the Bitcoin stream, but it didn't really get published, or figuring out how exactly the SSL strip attacks, but it wasn't published very easily, or just the fact that a lot of times a lot of the best work is in 2 or 3 tweets. Heck, there's a whole crypto library they just published in 2 or 3 tweets. And we end up with a situation where we spend most of our time wandering around reinventing the same wheel, failing in essence in the same way. I don't have time to go into the whole project. The idea is that HARC will be an archive, the same way as the Physics Archive project, to collect hacker work of all types and keep it published, keep it permanent, and keep it citable in a way that academic papers are through the DOI system. We're going to invent a new DOI that allows us to continue to actually cite other work and to mentor each other, not just the way that academics do, but have a real system of real peer review so that we can improve our own quality, so that somebody who wants to but has never tried to can go from a tweet to a couple blog posts to a conference presentation, even to an academic paper if they want, and we can track and cite and learn from each other along the way. The HARC project is to help us fail better, and it's available at theharc.net. Please come support us. So thank you to all those I've harassed or comments for the last few months, to Mudge for CFT and letting me not spend any time on law school, and to my law school for not letting me spend any time on law school. Also, I'm finishing law school in 10 more months. If somebody has any idea what the heck that somebody who's a hacker who also has a law degree ought to do, I'm taking suggestions. Drop me an email, even if the email is, even if it just says you're a lawyer, kill yourself. It's at least kind of fun to figure out how prevalent that is in our community. And again, check out theharc.net, because I think this is the only way we can move forward, is to stop failing the old same ways. Thank you all very much. So I think I've got a couple minutes for questions. Like, we've got 11 minutes? Cool. Absolutely. So yeah, questions, since you all obviously listened in when he scared you into not asking questions. Sorry? Oh, I didn't. Sorry, yeah, CreepyDOL stands for the Creepy Distributed Object Locator, but mostly it's CreepyDOL because there's a Jonathan Colden song. I knew it! Exactly. And there's a CreepyDOL, it's always watching you, it's got a ruined eye that's always open. Next question. Yeah. Shh.
I'm wondering if you've seen a project called Snoopy.
A project called Snoopy. No, I've never heard of it. Sorry.
I released a fucking tool last year, that's on London. Snoopy is a distributed tracking profiling data setting framework. So that plus your...
This is why we need HARC, is because I should have been able to find this. I did months worth of just searching for stuff that were like this, and I never found it. So no, I'm really sorry, but I'd love to talk to you.
Okay, so maybe just some things that I encountered that
Exactly, yes. Let's fail better together. It'll be awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe a call through problem. So I deploy this on the N900, which has an accelerometer. So someone picks it up, or makes it itself.
Can you get an N900 for 20 bucks?
I can get it for about 60.
That's not bad, actually.
Second-hand one. It's actually the hardware I use in the system I built now, so I just rebuilt it, and I use the Beagle bone. You know that, it's about $40. So it's much more stable than flat.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Also did big load testing on
Fair enough, yeah.
license on data.
Right. So just to summarize for everyone else who couldn't hear that, so the idea is why didn't you use other hardware, both the BeagleBone, which he's used, which is awesome software, or awesome hardware, and the Nokia N900. And the reason is in both cases actually cost. It's the same reason I couldn't use Arduinos, because they both just cost a lot more off the top. And the idea was to make this as cheap as possible. That doesn't mean other people can't do it better who have grants. I just don't. Other questions? Yeah. I don't plug them in because that would be wrong. No, you plug them in Starbucks or cafes or just random stores. Go in, don't wear a tie, that just creeps people out, but look like a very fresh-faced, clean-cut young student. Says, I'm running a sensor network project and I need to do some environmental sampling. We'll use this data only anonymously. Would you be willing to help us out by letting me place this here for a week? And just say it like that and give that little smile and just seem so cute and young and innocent, and I should probably cut my hair. And then they'll let you do kind of anything you want. It's pretty awesome, actually. So that's why you can drop them. The thing about coffee shops is you can drop pretty much anything under a coffee shop table and plug it in, especially if it's in a carbon monoxide detector case, and no one will touch it. The employees won't know that another employee didn't place it. Everyone else will be scared to touch it, to unplug even their laptop, and you'll probably get it for 3 or 4 months before somebody just throws it away because the hot glue fell off. Other questions? Anything else? Nothing? All too terrified? Just think I'm kind of boring? Yeah.
Is there a way to detect that one of these devices is in my home already? Where do you live? What is it?
So I want to say no, but that's not quite true. So these devices, like I said, in the current instantiation, this would be an obvious extension, they're not concealing their presence. So if you just look on your list of wireless clients, and you know every wireless client in your house, then you can just go through enumerate, turn them off, and if you find one you don't know where it is and turn it off, then you run around with an axe cutting open every small box until it gets turned off, right? Most people don't do that, and the thing is, like, I live by myself, and I've got like 30 or 40 wireless devices on my network, which is partially because I'm a hoarder, it turns out, but there's just a lot of stuff that's on Wi-Fi these days. So most people will never do that. As I mentioned before, they hide their pathways by communicating through Tor. So you can detect Tor, but assuming you use Tor, which since you're here you probably do, that doesn't really stand out on your network. And so there's no centralized point, even if you have a known adversary that would let you know, oh my God, that guy's after me, I always knew it. So they're not undetectable because they don't go into really lengths. You know, they're not cloning other MAC addresses of other things in your network. You could add all that. It's just running Debian. You can add it pretty easily. But they're not trying very hard. But most people will never notice this. This is really less about attacking hackers who are brilliant and know everything, than, as I'm sure you do, than attacking every random person in your neighborhood. And you know, if you say, so I live about 6 blocks from the state capitol. If I put these around the Capitol Square, where most of them live, work, eat lunch, say too many things, drink a few too many times, I don't need to attack any particular state senator before I get whatever it is I want, for all values of whatever, right? You find somebody with power and then you exploit them. In the words of Dr. Horrible, it's a whole big world out there and I just want to control it. Anything else? Yeah.
Sorry, I missed this. I missed why you have 2 Wi-Fi chips in each one.
The idea is, so one is to sniff and one is to phone home.
So one sniffs the other one.
Phones home. And then of course you program the sniffer not to listen to the one that's phoning home, otherwise you end up in a circle, which isn't impossible, it's just a pain and you end up filling up your hard drive. Yeah.
With just one Wi-Fi plug, you have it in monitor mode whilst connected to the
You can have it in monitor mode without connected to an AP. I never got that to work very efficiently. And I'm paying $6 for a Wi-Fi network and they're a Wi-Fi device and they're this big. So they only stick about 1 centimeter out of my little tiny USB hub. So I don't care. It's a good adaptation. You can make it more subtle. Other people? Nothing? Okay, thanks very much.